Hello, my name is Jamie Irvine. I'm the host of the Heavy Duty Parts Report, and we are live. So happy to see you again this week. As always with our live broadcast, if you would like to comment or share, please feel free to make a comment, ask a question. We'd love to have you participate in the program. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that's kind of a continuation of our discussion from last week. So last week we had James Cade on, and he's an asset management expert on fleets, right? And he talked a lot about the perspective of fleets with heavy duty parts, but his role really is to help fleets to maximize the value and the return on investment that they have with the assets that they've invested in. So this week, we're going to extend that conversation to include some new technology and a whole new way of thinking about managing those assets and getting more return on investment for them. So to do that, I would like to introduce my guest. We've got a returning guest. His name is Matthew Leffler. He's now the vice president of a company called vHub. And he's backstage. Let's get him in on today's broadcast. I'm going to add him to the stream right now. How are you today? Welcome back to the show, Matt.
Today is the best day, and this moment is the best moment. I could not be more excited, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me back.
Well, I appreciate that. We were so engaged in a conversation backstage that we actually almost blew our start time. And so if anybody notices that the intro was slightly off, it was just because Matt and I were having so much fun. And then all of a sudden we realized it was 10 o'clock Mountain Time. But we're here today to talk about the new company that you're with. We're here to talk about a new way of using technology and looking at fleets and their assets. So maybe we could just start off by getting you to explain to us, like, what problem does vHub really aim to solve?
What we're trying to solve at vHub are problems with trailers, specifically around asset utilization and really maximizing the value of the assets that you own. So what we talk about trailers is where you get your trailers. How much do you pay for it? Where do you want that trailer to go? For us, it's all about supply chain visibility and supply chain simplification. If you're a carrier and you need to find, or a broker for that matter, and you need to find trailers, every major metropolitan area will have dozens of companies that can rent or lease you trailers. But the only way you're going to know what they have is to either go to their website and hope that their inventory is up to date, or to make a phone call. We believe you can do it simpler by consolidating all of that asset information and showing where the visibility with our platform to make it easier to find trailers, utilize trailers, and ultimately get the product where the customer needs it to go. Renting trailers is too hard. We hope to make it easier.
Yeah, everything comes back to data. It's just incredible how many different ways you can look at our industry, and it always comes back to data. So, whether you're talking about lowering your total cost per mile and the total cost of operation, investing in high quality parts, that's part of asset management, or you're talking about just using the assets effectively. How does vHub work if a fleet wanted to, let's say, rent some of their trailers?
It's a great question. When it comes to understanding why a fleet would want to take their own existing capacity and their own assets and either rent them, or what we call sharing, which is another way of saying renting, you have to understand the problem that they're trying to solve for. And the easiest problem to understand is about what we call fleet rebalancing or repositioning. So how repositioning works is you might have a fleet that has a bunch of assets that are taking goods to a given location, but they don't have anything coming out of that location. So the way that the industry has typically solved that is either you send a driver who deadheads all the way down there, picks up that asset with no load and drives back, which is essentially an empty container, or you have to pay a third party to go out there and pick up that trailer and then bring it back. So the problem that we solve on the vHub perspective when it comes to repositioning is if you have a trailer that you need it to go somewhere, you just tell me where it needs to go. We will find the carrier who will then rent that asset from you and bring that to the final destination. In the process, they will find freight to load on that trailer. Carriers and brokers are always looking for additional assets. And for our perspective, if we can give a carrier or a broker a free trailer to use and they can bring it to the final destination, ultimately everybody wins. We cannot make more equipment. In terms of the supply chain, it is at its stretching point. What we can do is take the assets that exist today and better utilize them. Now, speaking of specifically of a of a fleet that's looking to potentially rent things, we got to talk about the data around how many trucks do you have for every trailer that you have. In North America, the ratio tends to be between 2.5 to 3 trailers per every truck that you have. Every fleet is interested in finding ways to consolidate and reduce the difference between the powered assets and the trailing assets. vHub gives you an interesting way to really maximize the value of your underutilized assets. If you're looking to improve your ratio of trucks to trailers, this is one platform. You can experiment and find out, do I really need to have 2 trailers or 3 trailers for every truck? Are there ways that I can be less asset heavy and still deliver the goods for my customers on time and undamaged? So that's kind of when a fleet would look at renting their existing assets. There's also these things called interchange agreements, and those are how fleets can share assets between each other.
Right, right. Before we go into that, I just wanted to kind of make sure I understand. So when it comes to that ratio of power units to trailers, what you're saying is that if you could, on the one hand, reduce the amount of trailers in a fleet required, meaning we don't have to invest in so many assets, but also if you could increase the amount of time those assets are actually earning revenue, it's kind of the best of both worlds, and it's a much improved situation for a fleet. And that's really the value proposition of what you're offering to fleets who may want to use their equipment at a fuller capacity. Is that correct?
100%. So I spent about a decade or so in this industry on the maintenance side predominantly. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I know about every carrier that I've ever met is they want flexibility. You can move goods from one place to another place with enormous amounts of variation. But what our platform enables is to make the way you move freight different and experiment with the technology to hopefully drive better asset utilization, find new paths to revenue, and ultimately make a more streamlined and efficient business.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you were going to the next thing. You were going to talk about what was it? I cut you off.
Oh no! So the next thing is like, so what was a fleet? I think the question is going to be, what does the fleet want when it comes to when they go out and rent something? And we kind of talked about that briefly at the beginning of the podcast, which was the way that fleets rent equipment is very eclectic in the sense of it is maddening how inefficient the industry is. These problems of repositioning or renting equipment is not new. These have been around for 50 years, 100 years. What is new is the technology that exists today solves those problems more efficiently. And that's what we try to strive for at vHub.
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to that kind of sharing, walk us through what historically has happened and walk us through how vHub will enable or empower fleets to do it differently.
So the way that, it's a great question. So the way that repositioning is done, which is the first use case I'll kind of speak to, is the way that they would call a broker or they would call a driving company to go pick up an empty container. And those are unbillable miles. That's an empty trailer moving down the street. And we don't think that's a good solution. The real solution we have is to eliminate the costs that are associated with it. So if you're a carrier and you want to reposition assets, it's a flat fee, $80. And then the person who will be using that asset gets to provide their insurance to show that they have the coverage. They do a full inspection of that trailer with pictures that are stored in the Google Cloud before and after they use that asset. The goal we have is to provide the visibility into those events that are already taking place. On the rental side, every rental company has different ways that they talk to their customers. So I had a rental fleet when I had outsourced fleet services of trucks. Whenever I had trucks that were available, I would call every single customer I had and said, I got a truck, I'd love to get it to you. And sometimes they'd have a need and sometimes they wouldn't. But that was manifestly an inefficient process.
Right.
That is completely unscalable. What I really wanted was a platform like vHub where I could take, here's my existing inventory, up into the web and let people consume that information and then make the rentals. Because ultimately the trends that we have is increasingly towards not having person-to-person communications. It is through an application. It is through engagements on the web. It's not through phone calls. It's not through faxes. It's not through all these other methods that have been used historically.
Yeah. Yeah, that inefficiency is something, I think over the years, we just got into certain modes of doing business, and it's very hard when you're in that business to kind of step back and reimagine how it can be done, which is why I think it's so important to have people who have kind of unique experiences like yourself and the team that has made vHub, and to be able to say, well, wait a minute, we can do this better. And let's try to offer a solution. So we talked a little bit about cost. We talked about insurance. When someone wants to rent the trailer, so we kind of talked about the fleets who say, hey, I want to rent my trailer to people, but let's say I need a trailer. Walk me through how I would go about using vHub. How is it going to change my experience as someone who's like, I need a trailer and I want to go into the marketplace and find, first of all, what did I have to do historically, and how do I do it now that I'm using vHub?
Absolutely. So historically, if you were looking for assets at some level of scale, you were looking at either local providers, regional providers, or national providers. And you never had any real clue onto what is their inventory actually looking like in the moment. It's going to be a phone call to get that information. The pricing is also something that's usually not communicated until you've talked to the people about what it is that you want. At vHub, we believe that that is not necessary. So the way that we look at it for a fleet who's looking to rent assets, number one, there's no cost to join the platform. There's no cost to look at what we have. So ultimately, there's no risk in your own business to find what you're looking for. What our platform has is the pricing for the assets, the description of the assets, and the terms that that particular owner would like to see, where it can be returned at a specific location or it can be turned at multiple locations. So the way that we see this unfolding as time goes on is to take the processes that we've always done and make them digital. Digital transformation in trailer rental is something that I'm really passionate about, because I'm really passionate about trailers and I'm passionate about efficiencies. And if I can make it easier for a fleet manager to say, I need 50 trailers in Tacoma, to be able to go onto the website, see what's available, make those rentals, and ultimately, what I mentioned previously is that it's free, except if you find value. When you find value, that's when you pay. When a transaction is done is when you pay. So you don't have to worry about just exploring and learning about what vHub can do for you.
And I mean, it's going to cost you no matter what. So you might as well do it in a more efficient way and have that cost actually come down, because, your time's not free. So that, to me, that's a no-brainer.
Absolutely. I love that you see it that way, because what we realize is the people who need trailers are eclectic, and the ways they find trailers are eclectic. And eclectic is fun insofar as it gives you a new flavor every day. But the reality is it's not scalable. It's not process driven. When it comes to making a better business for everyone in every stakeholder, it's about people, processes, and technology. I'm not going to help you with your people. I can help you with your processes. But ultimately, if I can provide a technology that gives visibility to your clients about what you have to sell to them, it means that everybody is going to have a better overall experience because it's more efficient. It's better visibility.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing that I'm kind of curious about is, does this technology enable people to literally start a new company in a new way? Because it's one thing to change how you did business historically, but what about all the entrepreneurs out there?
What I love about what vHub can achieve for somebody is it can change the way you do business entirely. So for example, let's say that you're a carrier and you're like, it's really hard to retain drivers and it's really hard to do all these other things, but I have all these trailers. What can I do with them? You can become part of a community where you're sharing trailers. So the trends that we see in the industry are really what some people are calling the ACEs: autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. Shared is just another way of saying rental. And if we have the ability to give somebody a pathway to take existing assets and find value in them for other people in the supply chain, it's amazing. So this is really changing the way that we look at assets, because do you have to own a trailer to be a trucking company? Of course you don't. You could be a trucking company and lease your assets. You could be a trucking company and do any number of things. So the technology allows different types of work. So for the entrepreneurs out there, if you have trailers, they're in demand, and I would love to help rent them for you.
Makes sense. I noticed when I was doing a little bit of preparation for our conversation that you've been selected as the 2020 top green provider, or one of them. Why is the solution more sustainable then?
First and foremost, our mission is about asset utilization. The studies that are out there have shown that up to 20% of trailers are not being utilized at any given moment. So if we have 4 to 5 million trailers that are just out there and not being utilized, that is inefficient. Efficiency is what drives innovation and what drives what we look at for making a more sustainable model, which is if we can't produce more, utilize them better, reduce dead miles. That is not valuable to have dead miles for anybody. So that is one of the reasons why we were selected. Additionally, it's about digital transformation. You can imagine a world of renting a trailer in any context where there's paper inspections, paper invoices, paper contracts. People are doing every single thing in ways that are not environmentally sustainable. The technology exists that you don't have to do it that way. If you could do it a more efficient way, that is better for the environment. So ultimately, we are really focusing on those ACEs, that autonomous, connected, shared, and then ultimately electric vehicles. And with what vHub enables is to provide that sharing platform where it is going to ultimately lead to a more sustainable supply chain.
If people are able to they're interested, they want to say, okay, I want to check it out. Where do they go and what's the first step?
The first step is you can visit our website, which is vhubapp.com. We have also in the App Store as well as in Google Play, you can find our application. It's absolutely free. We have demos available. We also have a lot of tutorials on YouTube. The thing that we want to make sure people understand is if you want to talk about trailers, I want to talk about trailers with you. The kind of work that our platform can do today is about repositioning, sharing, and renting. The pathway for this platform is to make the whole aspect of trailer ownership and utilization more efficient. And as we come to North America, we've been in business now for 2 years. 1 year it was in Canada, and the second year has been in the United States. So we are growing and innovating and finding new value for our customers. So I would love to talk to anybody, anytime about trailers.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We've been talking with Matt Leffler, Vice President at vHub. To learn more, as we said, go to vhubapp.com. After this live is done, we'll go back in and make sure that the show notes and everything are updated with the links so that you'll be able to go directly there. Matt, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's great to see you, Jamie. Thank you so much, man. Always a pleasure. Love what you're doing. And thank you for letting me be a guest on the podcast today.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. You've been watching another edition of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvine, and next week we're going to be discussing how to effectively use marketing to sell more parts. We're going to have returning guest Scott Bolts come on the show, and we are going to go deep on that subject. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.